Something that's always hype in fighting games are comebacks, pulling out a win from a seemingly inevitable loss. That's why nowadays, most fighting games facilitate this with comeback mechanics. Whether they be supers, bullshit, or just dumb, fighting games, especially tag fighters, have some sort of mechanic to help you come back. Battle for the Grid uses a mechanic known as Mega Zords, which is a bit different than your standard X Factor. In Grid, when you select your character, you also get to select a Zord. There are currently 6 Zords in the game, all of which are unique with different attributes. You build Zord meter by taking damage, as opposed to a game like Marvel 3 where your X Factor increases with each lost character. This means you can use them multiple times in a match. Zords have 2 uses, a counter attack costing 1 bar and countering an opponent attacking you if you're blocking, and an ultra attack, which lets you use 3 different moves to turn the tide of battle in your favor. One of these Zords is the Samurai Zord, and it is terrible. In this next portion of the video, I will be going over the Samurai Zord's attributes while comparing it to others. The only Zord I won't be going over is the Grave Zord, due to it being pretty new, but to be honest, it really isn't looking that great. All Zords have a counterattack costing 1 bar. You activate this while in block stun by hitting forward and both assists. These are good for a ton of things, but we are going to be looking at arguably one of its most important aspects: countering projectiles. Projectile spam. Yeah, it's annoying. Man, I just want to play the game. Activating Zord counter will make you invincible to the projectiles and wall bounce the opponents, forcing it back into neutral, giving you an opportunity to get in. Now, before we go into Sam Zord's counter, let's talk about the other Zords. Dino, Goldar, and SPD Zord counters go full screen, nullifying any attempt at projectile spam. Dragon Zords misses the mark on going full screen, but it's definitely still usable. There are a few times where all I can think is, why the fuck didn't this hit? But it isn't unbearable, just not as good. Now let's look at Sam Zords. That's horrendous. How do I stop zoning with this? Wait 2 more bars and summon the Dorito? This alone makes it a pretty pathetic choice, but maybe it has some other tricks up its sleeves. As stated before, Zords have 3 different options to attack when at 2 to 3 bars. These options are tied to L, M, and H. This gives you good options to mix up opponents if you can hide your options well enough. I'm just gonna cut to the chase on this one and just say, no, Sam Zord really does not have any mix. Most Zords have options to set up unblockables or at the very least good mix-ups, and if they don't, they have bullshit to compensate. Dino has a very strong low, Goldar and Dragon have overheads, and SPD, well, let's just say SPD has some bullshit, and that bullshit is called SPD Unblockable. So what does Samurai Zord have? It doesn't have a low or an overhead, so it has bullshit, right? Sam Zord definitely has a gimmick, and it's Light Call. This call summons 5 symbols that I don't actually understand to turn you into a walking hazard. The symbols do as following: red crumples, pink wall bounces, green restands, blue freezes, and yellow captures. This is actually a pretty decent call, because no matter what state you are in, even hit stun, the hitboxes on the symbols are still active. You can do anything while this is on you, so you can attempt to cross up opponents while wearing a hitbox. Each state also OTGs, which is pretty nice. The only negative about this, since your Zord isn't the one attacking with its big ass appendages, you can't do much against projectile spam. But that's honestly fine since you have 2 other Zord calls. So overall, not a bad start. Next up is the medium Zord call, the Flying Dorito. This boomerang zooms towards opponents, then comes back after a few seconds. These don't naturally combo into each other, but it isn't hard to set it up. Unfortunately, the first part can be low profile. This tends to be the move most people use to pull off Zord combos with Samurai Zord, and it works, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't easy with others. Also, certain hit stun animations actually low profile underneath the first hit. That's terrible. Also, I don't have footage, but I swear on the return trip it doesn't always have a hitbox. The H call of this Zord is a giant sword. Easily its quickest and most immediate attack, it covers most of the screen and has 2 hitboxes. The first hit staggers the opponent, which leads into the second hit. This second hit also OTGs. Basically, imagine a Zord counter, but it's a Zord Ultra, which costs more meter and it lasts a bit longer. That's kinda dumb. It's not a low, it's not an overhead, it just comes from one end and hits all the way to the other. It's like a Zord counter. It's not bad, but it's nothing special. So what do we have? We have a pretty decent gimmick, an alright tool, and redundancy. But what makes this even worse? SPD, like Samurai, has no mix, but it makes up for that in its baloney-ass gimmick. While the Zord's other 2 moves are either useless or nothing of note, its M-Call defines its viability. By activating this move while the opponent is midair, it will cause them to be unable to block while in the air. This affects the entire team, which leads to stuff like this.
Acceleration.
This means you can kill 2 opponents in one combo without it being happy birthday. But let's look at a more standard Zord. Mega Goldar doesn't have any huge gimmicks, but it's still very strong. This also applies to the Dino Zord. Goldar's L-Call summons this stab move I'm sure everyone's seen before. Yup, this is the basic bitch Zord combo everyone does. Regardless of my opinion on how boring this is, its ability to OTG and tracking ability makes this ideal for high damage Zord kill combos. But shouldn't Zords also help in the neutral? Yes, which is why its M-Call is so good. 2 hits, both being an overhead, make it an easy way to create nasty setups. This is the mix Samurai Zord is heavily lacking in. This M-Call forces the opponent into a situation you can easily take control of. What does Samurai do? Oh shit, not symbols! Better throw out my projectiles! Even Goldar's arguably most useless call, H, is pretty decent, coming out at a quick speed behind the opponent, causing a wall bounce. This is also very useful in combos. If it hasn't been blissfully obvious what Samurai Zord lacks, I will give one more example. Dragon Zord. Dragon Zord is often considered worse than the other 3 Zords above it, but it isn't bad either. Its L-Call, the drill, sets up decent pressure, chip, and does some good damage. Admittedly, the pressure this exerts isn't too great, but it isn't bad by any means. It's also pretty decent for some combos. Dragon Zord's M-Call is very neat, being an unblockable forcing you to jump in order to not get hit. This can set up for some neat unblockables or setups to jail in your opponent. And lastly, its H-Call is an overhead. It's not as good as Goldar's due to being quicker and only hitting once, but that doesn't make it bad. So, what do these Zords have that Samurai Zord doesn't? A purpose. When you activate these Zords, especially to take back neutral, you put the match in your control. They have to play to your rules in order to survive. When you activate Samurai Zord, they just have to block. Granted, you're probably blocking against other Zords, but they have mix-ups to keep you on your toes, while the Samurai Zord has some funky looking symbols and a flying chip. Oh yeah, and this. Can't forget this. Even its Zord combos are lame in comparison to the others, requiring extra work to pull off. I think the best part about Zords in this game is the ability to pick them based on how they work with your team. Yeah, you could make arguments that X Zord is better than the other, and vice versa, but at the end of the day, it's kinda less important which is better, and more important which one works better with your team. And in the case of Samurai Zord, any Zord would work better in its stead, regardless of your team composition. Ever since I started this game, I could tell at best this Zord was a gimmick with its symbols and nothing else. This thing is missing so much you might as well get rid of its left arm. Its only use is to boot up training and farm a crazy Icenia combo. So overall, when you are picking a Zord, think about what would work with your team. And then think about why it's better than this.